Yeah.
It's better than the natural curls.
I'll bet. Hey, folks. Welcome to the pre-show. While we get set up and ready to roll. So, Stylish Birch, good to see you. Microphone check. Check, check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Testes 1, 2. Testes 3, 4. Hey, Barbara D. Grumpy Stack here in the background. Don't forget about me. How can I forget about you, brother? Matt Finn, good to see you, brother. Yeah, that was a cool link you sent me today. That's very interesting stuff. Elderberry, good to see you. Morgan Snow, how you doing? See, I'm going to get the link set up over there. Make sure we're actually going over there. Hello, testing. Yep, we are. So I got to take the sound down. There we go. And we're ready to roll. Look at us. All set to go. Arlene, good to see you. Nice to have you in here. Arlene gets Tom Lewick. Tom Lewick from my past. Well, my present as well. We just haven't seen each other for decades, I think. So good to see you, Tom. This is the pre-show, by the way, for anybody coming in new. We go the first 4 minutes and 25 seconds after the hour. We're just setting up, and we don't go live on the radio station until 4 minutes and 25 seconds after the hour. There's Rowan.
Guess what I did today?
What'd you do today? Let me check the time before I start talking to you.
It was like this dot hair curler. It's like a dot, and it does these really cute waves.
Yeah.
And I was curling my hair, and I didn't look when I went to pick it up, and I picked up the hot part.
Oh, ouch.
Look at my finger. Do you see?
The lights are too bright.
Do you see the skin that's like burnt right there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does it hurt?
No.
Oh, that's good.
Every time I moved it, it felt like if you were pulling your skin like this.
Yeah. There we go. I think that's a little better. Barbie D says, hey, Rowan. So does Uncle Dave.
Hi.
Dave Potter's in the room. Tom, look, it's good to see you. Love you too, brother. Haven't seen you forever.
When we were floating down the Apple River, guess what was chasing me and Annabelle and Ruby and Alana and Alexis? A giant snapping turtle.
Big snapping turtle. They'll bite your toes off.
It was like this big.
They went down the Apple River today. Inner Tubes. My friend Steve owns the big River's Edge over here in Somerset. And there's tubing down the Apple River. She went where we went when I was her age. My mom and a bunch of their friends always took us down the Apple River. You look great. Say hi to Rowan. Hi, Rowan. That's Tom Lewick. He's an old friend of mine from 1980s.
Hi, Mom.
Oh, is Mom in there?
Yeah.
Hey, Rainey. Mom's been gone. Rainey has been gone for almost 3 weeks now. Well, 2.5 weeks. She comes home tomorrow night.
Mom, I went down the Apple River.
They went down the Apple River today. How fun is that?
I know. And we did.
All right, guys. I've got about 20 seconds, and we're going to go dark, and then the show will start. So stick around. Be sure to stick around after the show for the Captain's Cabin. That's our little after show. So I got 14 seconds after. I'm going to go dark. Stand by.
Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk Are you looking for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, ALANROBERTS.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad, so he can take me to Disneyland.
You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Hey folks, happy Wednesday evening. This is Scotty Roberts, your host of this, my show, the Intrepid radio program, right here on Odyssey Radio. You can go over to Odyssey Radio at ODYSYradio.com. Check out all the goodness that's Odyssey Radio, see all the other shows in the lineup, and you can catch this show in its audio rebroadcast tomorrow morning. I think it's 7 a.m. is when they rebroadcast this show, right during your get ready for work time. And let's see, you can also catch this show in its video simulcast. And that simulcast is found in 4 different places. 3 of them on Facebook, one on my Facebook page, one on the Odyssey Radio Facebook page, one on Intrepid Radio Facebook page. And you can also come over to my YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Scotty Roberts. And while you're there, like the show, give it a thumbs up. That always helps my numbers over on YouTube. And you can subscribe if you're not subscribed. And also hit that little join button down below if you'd like to do a little bit more and be part of a member of this broadcast. You can click on that and you can see what that's all about. So welcome to everybody over in the chat room tonight. Glad to see you all here. Some of you I didn't see at the beginning. Roger Rabbit, Elderberry, I saw you way early. Barbie D, I wanted to see if Leslie was here. Leslie always does something nice for this program, for me. And we got a little something, a little gift today. And I appreciate that, Leslie, if you're out there and you hear me. If not, I'll be sure to thank you next time I see you. She regularly supports this show, and I sure appreciate that. Because in case you don't know it, that's this show isn't my living. But we can, we do heartily accept gifts, and we don't run any ads on this show other than the network runs ads. You'll see that at the beginning and the end of the show. That's why we start 4 minutes and 26 seconds after the hour. And that's why we end 4 minutes and 26 seconds. And there's 3 minutes and 40 seconds or something before the end of the hour. So anyway, blah, blah, blah. That's all technical stuff there. All that introductory matter is out of the way. I wanted to, before we get into our topic tonight, which is going to be, we're going to kind of finish off, unless at the end of the show tonight we feel we're not done yet, finish off this whole look at Mount Sinai. What is the real Mount Sinai? I like this kind of topic because it gets my archaeological juices going. It's also stuff that I have always believed. And I say, this happened here. The mountain that you all know by now, for having listened to me for years, is that the mountain that I chose, and that was in our book. I gotta show the book again. John Ward and I wrote this book, The Exodus Reality, and it's subtitled Unearthing the Real History of Moses, Identifying the Pharaohs, and Examining the Exodus from Egypt. And there we are in the back cover. That's us in front of the Sphinx a few years ago. This book came out, by the way, in October of 2013. That's how old it is. But it's full of pictures. You'll see tons of pictures. We got the color sections in there. For all of you who say, I don't like to read books, but I'll look at pictures. This has got tons and tons of pictures from our excursion for a month through Egypt, researching this book. So my view on Mount Sinai was one that I had formulated for a few years prior to the publishing of this book in 2013. I feel that it's the mountain Serebet el-Khadim, which is in the western central Sinai Peninsula. And as I mentioned again last night in the captain's cabin after hours, we got to show some pictures in the captain's cabin of Serebet el-Khadim and our trek up and down that mountain, and all the ruins that are at the top there. Flinders Petrie was one of the first proponents of Serebet el-Khadim back in the late 18th century as being the mountain of God, the Mount Sinai of the Bible. And so we looked at all that, and you really got that feel when you were there. However, not all the archaeology fits. Not all the history fits. What was up there 3,000 years ago? There was a community of high priests up there, or priests up there. They made stelae and the inscriptions. And there were the two temples that were actually caves, two caves at the top of this plateau that were the cave of Ptah and the cave of Hathor. And for 1,600 years, successive pharaohs built these little chambers with all their inscriptions and statuary coming out in a straight line out from those caves. And they ended with, I think it was Ramesses VI was the last one, and he's actually the entryway to get into these ruins. And it's not well visited. I think more and more people are learning that it's there. But we drove out. We were guests of Sheikh Barakat. He picked us up in his little Toyota pickup truck and drove us 40 miles from the Red Sea inland to this mountain. And he put John and I up in his Bedouin tent that was 120 years old. His great-grandmother had made it, and their family. And so we climbed the mountain the next day, took the ceremonial path up, and then we took the not-so-ceremonial path down, if you saw some of the slides last night. But I always believed that this was, and as I even said in the book, I am 98% convinced that this is Mount Sinai of the Bible. Now, there are other pundits and other researchers who will tell you, well, no, this was a stopping point after the Exodus, after the crossing of the Red Sea, and they went down into the Sinai. They stopped here to pick up more of the slaves that were working all the mines, and there's mines in all the hills, the rugged hills all around this. And this mountain was a center. There was a shrine up at top you could see from the desert floor. This center was called Hathor's Mountain. She became the patron, not a patron saint, the patron goddess, Egyptian goddess of Egyptian miners. And this was her mountain, which led me to speculate that perhaps this is why the children of Israel chose to build a golden calf when Moses was gone for 40 days. And they told Aaron, build us a calf. And why did they choose a calf? It's not mentioned in Exodus. Well, the calf was the calf goddess Hathor of Egypt, and this was her mountain. I think that was one of the big selling points for me. Well, now we looked last night, of course, at something I didn't even know about at the time we wrote this book, which seems like a really plausible site for the Exodus, or for the Mount Sinai. And that is all the way over on the other side of the Sinai and across the Gulf of Aqaba into Saudi Arabia. And that is Jabal al-Lawz is the name in Arabic, which literally means the mountain of the law. That would fit if that's where Moses, and it's been that name for thousands of years. So this was a very Hey, Norman, good to see you. He says, did it look like sheep or goats could graze in the area? No, not nowadays. That is a big contention as well. How did they feed their animals? Now, there's obviously there's flocks out there. The sheikh has flocks of sheep and goats and camels and things like that. They do have scrub that they feed off of down there. There's not like green pastures. But both these sites are surrounded by desert today. And even the traditional traditional site of St. Catherine's, which you've all seen pictures of. If you ever watched the 10 Commandments with Charlton Heston, the mountain they use as the backdrop paintings in that are paintings of Jebel al-Musa. And that's the Jebel Musa. That's where St. Catherine's, the monastery, has been for 1,300 years, 1,500 years, something like that. At the base, that's the traditional site. Matthew Finn says he's well versed on Jebel al-Lawz. The horns throughout ancient culture represent the planet Venus as it travels through our sky. We'll see. No, I had not heard Venus. I had heard of the Sophis star. And that's a whole different thing, a whole different study for the dating systems in Egypt. But Jebel al-Lawz has a lot of landmarks that seem to fit the biblical narrative. And so there's a biblical narrative that you can follow. There is, I'm going to mention one thing from a man that I greatly respect, but I didn't always agree with him on this, especially this point. He was one of my seminary professors. He was the president of our seminary when I attended seminary back in 80, 81, 82. And Tom Lewick, you might be the only one in this group that might even know who he is. Dr. Charles Ailing, Chuck Ailing, I knew of him as. He was the guy, when I was 11 years old, I had to do a report, and many of you have heard this story. I had to do a report on in Sunday school, and I was given the topic of the Pharaoh of the Exodus. And I didn't know anything about this stuff when I was in 7th grade. And so he said, I want you to go see a man, Chucky Ailing. He was a member of our big church. And so I met Chucky Ailing the next Sunday after church in the narthex of the church. And he gave me the lowdown on Amenhotep II and Tutmosis III and all the pharaohs. And he really established for me what has been my, I believe, academic belief that these are who these people were. And this is why he told me why Amenhotep II and so on, the dating system and all of that. And so I grew up for the next few years. And when I went into college, I wrote papers about this. When I went into seminary, I studied this. And then finally, John Ward and I wrote this book, and I detailed that account of the Tutmosian dynasty. Tutmosis I, Tutmosis II, Tutmosis III. Tutmosis III being like 4 years old when his father, Tutmosis II, died, who was his stepmother's brother. So Hatshepsut, very famous Egyptian queen, who became Pharaoh, was married to Tutmosis II. He dies in his late 20s. He was sickly, they say, according to Egyptian history. And she became co-regent with his son from a harem wife, Tutmosis III. Well, she co-regents with him for about 6 years. Then she takes over. For the next 20 plus years, reigns as Pharaoh of Egypt. And meanwhile, you'd think there'd be a big schism between them. He grew up in the lap of luxury. He grew up in peaceful times in Egypt. And he became the general of all her armies and never led a coup against her. And it was after she died, he just took over. He was about 30 when she died. He took over as Pharaoh and reigned for about 50 years. And so, and he led several successful military campaigns. And his son, Amenhotep II, became co-regent with him when he was 18. And Tutmosis III was approaching 80. And then when he died, of course, Amenhotep II became Pharaoh in his own right. And this is the guy who I believe was the Pharaoh of the Exodus. Anyway, all of this, set that all aside. What I'm trying to do by establishing this is that there is a belief system that also backed up my trust in this history. And the question that I posed for the title for tonight's show, whom can you trust when it comes to the 5 or 6 or 7 different sites that are called Mount Sinai? And you have academics and scholars, from Jewish scholars to Christian scholars to guys that are archaeologists to people who aren't even archaeologists, just follow the history. And they end up with this controversy over these different sites. And I really think it comes down to just 2 or 3 different candidates that are the most likely. But I had another one I'm going to present to you tonight that I looked at. And I'll look it up. It's Kokmar or Kokar is another site. And it's in North Sinai toward the east. And they say that the Israelites would have left the land of Goshen in Egypt. If you're looking at me, it'd be backwards from this. I'll do it backwards. They left Goshen and crossed the Wadi Tumalat, crossed the bitter lakes at the north point of the Red Sea, and went straight across the Sinai, and you end up at this other site. And the other two are very different. They would have traveled south along the east coast of the Sinai to move inland to either Serabet el Khadim, which has been my choice, to the traditional site of St. Catherine's. And there are even, pardon the noise, that's my child hauling things around, familial interludes. And so there's the Jebel al-Lawz, which is in Saudi Arabia. You'd have to travel all the way to the southern tip of the Sinai Peninsula and then start going just a little bit north, and there's a land bridge beneath the waters of the Gulf of Aqaba, which is just an extension, the two fingers that come off the big Red Sea that comes up. There's the Red Sea, and it goes up on one shaft, and then the Gulf of Aqaba on the east side of the Sinai. And there's a land bridge, which is still there today. And I've mentioned this all nights that we've talked about the Sinai topic. These adventurers, these guys who are not archaeologists, they're historians. They went and looked up they followed the biblical path. And this is where they believed they were to end up. And the Yam Suf was a place where they say the Yam Suf is way up in the north, where the Sea of Reeds is, at the tip of the northern tip of the Red Sea. Well, they're saying Yam Suf in Arabic means Land's End. And there is a place at the point of Sinai, which is called Land's End, Yam Suf. And then they crossed over on this land bridge. They walked over the ocean, which is a very narrow spit from the Red Sea entering in the Gulf of Aqaba. And they're walking along this land bridge about waist deep in water. And they're thinking that the miracle of God was clear, parting the Red Sea there. And they walked over on this dry ground. And then once you get into Saudi Arabia, it's just they found other sites that they related to the Exodus story, the bitter springs there. Then a little further on, the 12-springed oasis of Elim, and then eventually the mountain of Jebel al-Lawz. And at that mountain, there's all kinds of artifacts, where at the traditional site of St. Catherine's, there's no artifacts that would tell you this was Mount Sinai. Nothing. It's devoid of that. It's just tradition. Serabet el Khadim, you don't have artifacts of settlement or anything like that, or any of the biblical story. You just have an appropriate look. You've got the stelae that get made. You got the miners that were there, that they stopped there in the Bible. Other scholars have said, but it was by a different name in the biblical text. But then you've got Jebel al-Lawz, which has all the circle rings of stones that they put up every 400 yards in a semicircle at the base of the mountain to mark the base of the mountain so people wouldn't cross over. They found an altar built there to the specifications of the biblical text, an altar where they gave sacrifice of cattle. And there was a cattle stall built into the ruins alongside this altar. This altar was supposed to be made not with hewn stones. And of course, you had a whole army of people in the Israelites who, what did they do? They built, many of them were stonemasons. They stacked stone. They built monuments in Egypt. And so they built this unhewn stone, raw stone, big altar. You've got Moses, it said, erected 12 pillars to represent the 12 children of Israel, or the 12 tribes of Israel. And you find big marble pillar sections that are each maybe about 2 feet tall, something like that, but they were stacked. That's how they built those pillars. And you see those stones laying all around there. And they say there's 12 base stones. So there's all kinds of evidence there that seems to point to it, let alone the mountain itself. The top of the mountain is blackened. And it's blackened by what? It's not a different kind of stone. it's still limestone, but it's been charred in antiquity. The whole top of the mountain. I've got some of these pictures. Those of you listening on the radio, you missed this, but I'm going to show it to you anyway. Here is, let's see, here's Jebel al-Lawz. I'll show you this one. Boom. I'm going to take off my my banners so you can see this better. Where is my banner? Right there. Boom. All right, let's put this up. So there's a mountain. That's Jebel al-Lawz. This is this mountain in Saudi Arabia. And then you have not just that mountain. You can't really tell as well in this picture. It looks like there's clouds that are shading the top of the mountain. Those aren't clouds. That's no moon. For those of you who get that reference, I love you even more. Here's a picture of that mountain up close, Jebel al-Lawz. And they went up and they cracked open some of the stones up there. And it was limestone like everything else, but it was charred on the outside. And it's been this way for millennia. Was this the mountain of God where God descended down and the presence of God burned the top of this mountain? I don't know. So that is another thing that's there. Now, you know me, folks, by now. I am not the man of faith I used to be. Dave Potter, he's pretty sure Mount Sinai is in the Appalachians in Tennessee. He learned that from Billy Bob, who can't neither read nor write. No offense to my Appalachian friends. So I think Jebel al-Lawz is a great candidate for this mountain. Now, not only were there, I got to show you this as well because I mentioned it, and I've shown these the last couple of nights. Here is the altar that was there. This is the altar, and by the way, the Saudis have this all fenced off and barbed wired. This whole site. So this is the altar that was built. It's flat on top, but all over this altar are engraving or carvings, pictographs, ancient pictographs of cattle, of cows, of bulls, the Apis bull, which is a very Egyptian thing. So once again, you've got the tie into possibly this is the altar where they put the golden calf on top, and perhaps these pictographs all relate to that, either that event or as a remembrance of that event, that this is where this happened. And it's all over. These pictographs of cattle are all over these stones. There's also, I got to show you this one. This is all in recap. There is also the split rock, which is this right here. The split rock is on this site. Now, they say that this is the split rock where God told Moses to crack the rod against the stone and water would gush forth for the thirsting people. And so it was very interesting that this site at Jebel al-Lawz has all of these, if you will, artifacts, natural sites. It's all there that fits the biblical account of the Exodus and the sojourn to Mount Sinai. And by the way, this stone has remnants of water erosion running all down. I don't know if you can see my mouse in here. I don't think you can, but running all down the front of this hill. All the lighter colored stone is all water eroded, as well as though there's a basin there that would have made a small lake of fresh water. So it's very interesting stuff when you start looking at this. Now, there's another site that I think I was gonna start tonight's show. Maybe we'll do this on Friday, because remember, tomorrow night I'm not here. There's going to be an archived show playing tomorrow night over on the radio station, but not here on YouTube unless I can get something to work out. They don't let you re-show your shows in you can't put a timer on it and you can all come in at the right time. They don't let you do that for some reason. So I got to reload something to do something for tomorrow night. So I was going to talk about, was Rahab really a harlot? I called up something from the Biblical Archaeology Society. I was going to kind of tease you with that a little bit tonight, talking about more archaeology, because we talked about the city of Jericho and the destruction, and the walls came tumbling down. We were talking about that last night, the city of Jericho. And the interesting thing, and why Jericho plays so heavily in the dating of the Exodus, is that it is the first city that the Israelites conquered after Joshua took over as leader after the death of Moses. So right after that 40 years of sojourn as Bedouins, almost as wandering nomadic tribe of Israel through the wilderness of the Sinai. And Jericho has been dated by none other than Kathleen Kenyon and other very famous archaeologists who worked that site to right around 1400 BCE, which would fit right into the 1446 Exodus date that I adhere to, that falls during the reign of Amenhotep II, who I mentioned earlier. Moses went back and led the people out around 80 years old. He led the people out. They wandered for 40 years. Joshua takes over and they start sacking the land of Canaan. And Jericho is the first city destroyed. And this city was destroyed around 1400 BCE, which would fit right into the dating system that's laid out in the Bible. Now, if you missed this the other night, I'll give this to you again, just in a quick recap. 1 Kings 6:1. Look up that passage in the Bible. It says, in the year that Solomon dedicated the temple in Jerusalem, Solomon, the son of David, was the 480th year after the Exodus took place. It says that in 1 Kings 6:1 in different language style. And we know that whether you believe Solomon was a real guy or not, I don't believe there's any reason to doubt that he was. There's enough archaeological evidence, historical evidence to prove that he did live, that the house of David was intact at that time. But Solomon would have built this temple, I think it was in his 6th year of his reign or something like that. I'd have to look up the verse again. But it dates to Temple 1, and anything they've been able to date that are artifacts from Temple 1, the Temple Mound in Jerusalem, where now stands the Mosque of Omar, that temple compound where they have been able to dig around and underneath, they found things that place the dating of the temple to 966 BCE, give or take a couple of years in either direction. Literally just 3 or 4 years in either direction. So 966 is the median date. You take 480 and you get 1446 BCE for the date of the Exodus. If that's 480 years difference, and voila, you get right into the timeline that I established. It's been established before me. So, so there, you've got the basics of that now. And so I was going to talk about Rahab. We'll save her. We'll maybe talk about her. This will be Biblical Archaeology Week. Now, let me put in a disclaimer for those of you who don't know this about me. I was once a man of faith. I was once in ministry. I was in youth ministry after my seminary days. I went to seminary back in the early 80s. And there were things that led me to drift far away from that faith. Let's just call it simply, I had my questions of God that were unanswered. I became very disillusioned. And I drifted away. I just chose not to believe any of that anymore. And much of it was due to some of my research that seemed to tell me that Christianity and Judaism didn't seem any different than any other religion that was out there. I'm putting that in a nutshell just to explain this. So I've spent many years, a good 25 years of my life, outside of Christianity. Not throwing out the baby with the bathwater, but being some of my old seminary friends will call me a practical atheist. I'm not an atheist. I am, though, a practical agnostic. Agnostic meaning lacking knowledge of. I just don't have the proof. I don't have the knowledge of, and I seek the answers. So for me to change that, I would once again have to just simply believe by faith in something that is very difficult for me to believe by faith. So there it is. That's how I got to where I am. Yeah, Philip, that is a very precise dating, by the way. And I don't think it can be questioned, frankly, not because it's my dogma, but because it's history. It's a part of history. And I'd have to get into a whole show or 2 or 3 just to establish why that history dating system works. But it works from the dating of the founding of the temple back 480 years and so on and so forth. So I actually had a slide that I was going to put up. I won't do it tonight because it'll take too much time to get into the dating system. Maybe we'll talk about that again in a future date. But yeah, St. Thomas was agnostic. Yeah. The doubting Thomas you're talking about? Yeah. And but of course he gave up his agnosticism when he put his hole in the hand of Jesus, in the hole in Jesus' hand. So, or wrist. He would have been wrist. So so this is my starting point. And I researched this stuff, and I'm very interested in this stuff because I want to know things. Now, there was a song of Michael Card's that I sang many years ago. Tom Lewick, if you're still here, if we did it in the youth group back then, God's Own Fool. And it says, "It seems I've imagined him all of my life as the wisest of all of mankind. But if God in his wisdom seems foolish to men, he must have seemed out of his mind. For even his family said he was mad, and a priest said a demon's to blame. But God in the form of this angry young man could not have seemed perfectly sane." And the chorus says, "When we in our foolishness thought we were wise, we became fools, and he opened our eyes. When we in our foolishness thought we were strong, he became helpless to show we were wrong. And so we follow God's own fool. For only the foolish can tell. Believe the unbelievable, and come be a fool as well. So come lose your life for the carpenter's son, for the madman who died for a dream. Then you'll have the faith his first followers had. You'll feel the weight of the beam. So surrender the hunger." This is where it gets me. "Surrender the hunger to say you must know. Have the courage to say I believe, for the power of paradox opens your eyes and blinds those who say they can see." I struggle with this desire to want to know things. But my whole life, when it comes to my faith story, is about doubting. I doubt things. And because I doubt things, I question them. And because I question them, I want to research them. I want to look into them. I want to find out what it means. And these were some of the things that led me into my agnosticism, was studying so much, researching so much that it didn't seem to me like the biblical account was any different than apologetic accounts that I've seen in other texts, different than religious texts of other religions, ancient religions. It was just another attempt by man to make sense of God, an etiology of faith to make sense of God. Now, does that mean I have thrown it out? No. You can still tell. I mean, it still works up emotion in me to think about it, to talk about it, to dwell on it, because it's there. Matt Finn says, "I used to claim agnosticism, but I came to realize it's a futile endeavor." It might be. It might be. I'm just not satisfied yet. I want to say, show me the nail prints in your hands and the spear thrust in your side. I mean, I'm the doubting Thomas. So I think I probably believe more than I let on than I do. I just struggle with things. I struggle with answers. I struggle with answers that don't seem to make any sense to me. So that is the same thing with the Exodus. However, when I go into the Exodus and I go into Moses, I can't not believe that Moses existed. There is too much written about Moses. Is there historical records that say he was born on this day and died on this day? No. But there's too much. I believe he wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, the Pentateuch, or the Torah in the Jewish sense. I don't think there's any reason to doubt that the man existed, because the faith story places miraculous deeds around his lifetime. Could Moses have been a man that led his people out of Egypt? Yeah. Could he have capitalized on natural events? Sure. I don't think he did. I think there was supernatural hand at play in the 10 plagues and in the Exodus from Egypt, the parting of the Red Sea. God could use natural events. We've talked about some of those for the parting of the Red Sea up in the Bitter Lakes. Some of the strong winds. Remember, Moses, I'll just mention this, he stretches his rod over the water, it says. God told him, stretch the rod over the water, and I'll part the waters. And it says, and a strong east wind blew all night and parted the waters. Didn't happen in an instant. But then there's that natural event that's been recorded that can take place in the Bitter Lakes. Strong east winds coming off the Negev from Israel. You go up in the Negev, you go up toward Israel, cross the north of the Sinai up into the Negev. The way you're looking at the camera, it would be, across, across this way, across the north of the Sinai, up into the Negev, which is to the south of Israel. And those strong east winds would blow in and had the effect of drying off the low-lying waters of the Bitter Lakes, the Sea of Reeds up to the north of the Red Sea, and that they could cross on dry ground. And when it ceases, the wind will stop and the water comes rushing back in like a tsunami, even though the lake is very shallow. Now, can God use that? Can God make a miracle happen with a natural event? Sure. Can God do it all on his own? Sure he can. So I'm not discounting that. So there you go. So all of these events lead me to the question. I don't know if I left off on something, and I rabbit trail so easily, when I get to these events. I was giving my faith story to say why I research this stuff and why it interests me. When I went to Egypt for the first time, it was standing where these events took place. Going up to Serabet el-Khadim, I was standing where Moses dwelt for 40 days up there, where the golden calf, that was my belief there. And if that wasn't Sinai, it was a place where they were, a place where Moses probably communed with the priests that dwelt there at the compound at the top of the mountain. All of this, it gave you that feel. I remember going to Menedat Habu. It's one of the big temples in Luxor. And you go into that temple and you're crossing the threshold into the Holy of Holies in this Egyptian temple, praising and worshiping Egyptian gods. And there's this concave threshold. It's about 4 to 5, 6 feet long, maybe 2 feet wide. And it's the threshold that you step on as you're going in. It's this stone that's been there since the building of the temple. And I stopped on that stone and I said to John Ward, I said, whoever Moses was, he stepped here. His foot touched this threshold because as a prince of Egypt, he would have, and I do believe he was a prince of Egypt. And we'll go into that at a different time. That's what that whole book is about. That's him back there, by the way. For those of you who don't know, that bust back there is Senenmut, who I believe is the biblical Moses. He would have crossed that threshold. And just being there and saying, I'm standing on a spot that I know his feet would have touched. Just an amazing experience. Serabet el-Khadim. So all of these things leads me to why the subtitle for tonight's show was, who do you believe when it comes to all these different, especially when we're talking about Mount Sinai? How do you know whose theory to believe? Whose mountain is the right mountain? Do you follow history? Do you follow archaeology? Do you follow all the different pundits that fall under those two categories, historians and archaeologists? You'll have archaeologists who don't even believe Moses existed because they can't prove he existed archaeologically. I always said, and I said to Dr. Ailing once, I said, I believe there is so much secondhand archaeology that it sustains the fact that Moses existed and the Exodus took place. And he said, hey, listen, there is no such thing in my book as secondhand archaeology. There's archaeology and there's not archaeology. If you look at history, I can substantiate for you why I believe that guy back there and that bust why that's Moses, Senenmut. I can substantiate why I believe the Exodus took place, the route they took, leaving Goshen and going through the Wadi Tumalat to the tip of the Red Sea and crossing the Bitter Lakes. What throws a wrench in that gear is Jebel al-Lawz, down to the south of the Sinai. Is that where they crossed? Did they cross over on the land bridge there? Was there a strong wind sent by God that cleared that land bridge off and they crossed over and Jebel al-Lawz is the place? Or did they, like if I show you a map again of that area, this is a map I did for our book. It's in the book. But I also, here it is. Boom. Okay, this map, you've got Menifer up here into the north, just below the south of the Nile Delta. I can't point at it on here. I don't think you can see my mouse. But Menifer is ancient Memphis. Cairo is just to the north of that now in present day. Goshen was to the north and the east of that. Avaris is the city that the Hebrews would have built while they were in Canaan, probably before they were even enslaved. They built the city of Avaris. After the Exodus, a couple of 150 years later, Ramses II usurped that old city and built the treasure cities of Pithom and Ramses. As the book of Exodus says, the Israelites built the treasure cities of Pithom and Ramses. No, they didn't. They built Avaris. And they may not have known that when they rewrote the Old Testament in about 400 to 500 BCE at the Library of Alexandria, because everything had been destroyed in the Babylonian captivity. And all the rabbis went to the Library of Alexandria in the late 400s or early 400s, if you're looking backwards, and asked permission to look up all the old texts, the Hebrew texts, the Hebrew Bible, the Torah, the books of the prophets, and so on. And they wrote what we now have. Your current Old Testament is based on the Septuagint, which is what they wrote in the language of commerce of the day, Greek. And so the Septuaginta or the Septuagint is what they wrote. That was the Old Testament rewritten by the rabbis to establish the history of Israel and bolster the faithful of Israel. And they went and looked up all the old documents they could at the Library of Alexandria, and by oral tradition reconstructed the Old Testament. This is why I think you're missing names and dates and places for the Exodus. This is why they didn't know where Mount Sinai was at that time. And it was Paul in Galatians 4 that said something about Paul, who wrote 2/3 of the New Testament, said Mount Sinai is in Arabia, he said. Now, some of the scholars would like to tell you that I know one of the guys that first went to Jebel al-Lawz in Saudi Arabia said that the mountain of God, Sinai, lay outside of Egypt. Well, back in that time, Sinai was part of Egypt. So if it was outside of Egypt, it would cross over into Saudi Arabia. This is where they say the land of Midian was, where Moses dwelt. Remember, he was at the encampment of his father-in-law's people. Was right near. He went and found the sheep, and that's where he had the burning bush encounter. Was on Mount Sinai, whichever mountain that was. So if he's living in Midian, which they've determined it was in eastern or western Saudi Arabia, this could be the spot. But current scholars say, well, no, Sinai didn't exist as Egyptian territory back then. But we do know that the Egyptians had forts and garrisons throughout the Sinai, and that it is today still part of Egyptian territory. So I don't see there's any reason to doubt that. So there's all these little facts that come in. Who do you believe? Whose story do you believe? I brought this map up to show you something. What did I want to show you? So you got Avaris in the north. I think the Israelites went south, came from Goshen, came from Avaris, which, by the way, was the mud brick capital of ancient Egypt. And they wandered through the Wadi Tumalat, the trade route, and they ended up at the northern tip of the Sea of Reeds. And this is where they crossed the sea and came down on the eastern side of the Sinai. I've got the yellow line in there to show how they would have gone to the Yam Suf down at Land's End in the Sinai and crossed the land bridge and made it over to Jebel al-Lawz. Now, of course, I still think they could have crossed at the Sea of Reeds and crossed the northern part of the Sinai to avoid the garrisons of Egypt. And they would have ended up coming down the east side of the Gulf of Aqaba and to this place. But who knows exactly? There's so many different routes to take. So the big question has to come back. And this is in the last few minutes we have with the radio audience. The big question has to come down to, who do you believe? I don't think there's any definitive way of knowing who to believe precisely. But what I found these guys to do, who went to Jebel al-Lawz, was they found all these sites that seemed to indicate that this was the place. Every, I was going to say artifact, every site at Jebel al-Lawz seems to match the biblical account of Mount Sinai and what Moses established there. So, and they didn't go off of archaeology, they didn't go off of history, they went by what they saw. And the archaeology was dating the things. How old is this stuff? And so it flew in the face of a lot of pundits. And what's going to happen? When I came out with a theory for Senenmut being Moses, you know who I got the most heat from? Biblical scholars who didn't believe it was Moses. Senenmut was Moses. They believed it was someone else. And they had a different dating system. Oh, well, you didn't account for the Sothis star, or you didn't account for the this and the that in your dating system. And your dating system's all wrong, you know? And I disagreed with them. I said, I did a mix of the two. By the way, I've got to tell you this. When John and I wrote this book, the head of the, who was it? The head of it was one of the big churches over there, looked at this book and they said, while we respect John's research and his efforts, we have to go more on Scotty's side of the research on this one because it more follows the biblical account. And so what I did was I followed history, the dating system, archaeology, and the biblical account. John was offering something that was a little more biblical minimalist, but fit just a few years after mine with a different character and so on. And so we had different points in the book and we trace them all through this book, back and forth from chapter to chapter. So I think what you have to come down to, this is my opinion, is like Fox Mulder said, trust no one. What you've got to do is look this stuff up and decide what fits the picture biblically by the text, what fits the picture by the archaeology, what fits the picture by the history. And remember we mentioned the El Arish stone that just popped into my head, so I got to mention it. The El Arish stone was a stone that Shimke Yakubovici, the naked archaeologist, wrote about this and did a thing on, a documentary on it a long time ago. But it was found, it was tipped on its side being used as a trough in modern day Egypt from some farmer. And they tipped this up and the inscriptions on it told the story of the Exodus from a fairy tale point of view. It didn't sound like the story of Moses, but they had Hatshepsut was in there, fit the timing, all of these differences. But this is where you saw the hieroglyphs for the parting. Sorry, no time for mute button there. The parting of the Red Sea, the three squiggly lines indicating the sea, and a knife before it, indicating the parting of the waters. And it fit into the story. That's the little bit of COVID hangover still, folks. So we've only got a few seconds left, and we've got to get out of here for the radio audience. I want you to stick around. If you're not in the chat room over on the YouTube channel, go over there. Or if you're on the Facebook page, you can stay there. I highly recommend come over to the chat room over on youtube.com/Scotty Roberts. And after this break and leaving the radio audience, we are going to go right into the captain's cabin. Arr. I can't do it. My voice is foggy now. So everybody over there in the radio land that is listening by radio, I just want to say to you, thanks for being here and live long and prosper.
The Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.
Are you looking for a really awesome and amazing graphic designer? How about an illustrator or a photographer? This is Rainey Roberts, and I wanted to tell you how you can get my designer, illustrator husband, Scotty Roberts, to work for you on your project. Do you have an awesome self-published book but no cover, or even worse, a cover that really sucks? Do you need a kick-ass logo for your company or some f***ing awesome graphic designs for your ads or website? Then get in touch with my husband for the best f***ing awesome kick-ass design and illustration. He knows his stuff, and he's been at this for more years than I've been alive. Go to ScottAllenRoberts.com. That's Scott with 2 T's, ALANROBERTS.com to take a look at his online portfolio of work, or call 651-468-8115. Now go out and kick some ass with some kick-ass graphic design.
Hire my dad so he can take me to Disneyland.
Avast and bring in the rum. It's time for the captain's cabin. All of you lubbers out there and those of you who have seaworthy legs, welcome to the program. This isn't really the program. This is the after program. This is where we let our hair down. You guys can call in if you want. We can talk about stuff. And I don't know how long we'll go. It all depends on if we've got Uncle Dave coming in or Professor Bauer. I haven't seen Professor Bauer for about 2 weeks. So he's either really mad at me about something. Nah, he wouldn't do that. He's got other things going. So it's always fun to have him in. Here's, of course, Rowan has come to visit us. Here's my 10-year-old Rowan. Somerset Spartans. Go, Spartans. Go, Spartans. Whoa, Spartans. She's a cheerleader.
No,
So.
not anymore.
Not anymore. Not anymore. It's
Volleyball
beneath
player,
me
Dad.
now.
I even got my volleyball shorts.
Yeah, she's a volleyball player. She's now a player. She's not just a cheerer. She's athletic, this one. Incredible athletics. So, oh, look here. We got Uncle Dave. Let's bring him in. Uncle Dave's driving again.
We're going to give it a shot. We'll see if we can hold a picture.
We'll
Hey,
give it
Rowan,
a
how
shot
are you,
and see if we can
sweetheart?
hold a picture.
What?
How are you?
Good.
You have a good time on the river?
All that for that.
Yeah, I did. I cut my knee open going down the river. See how many cuts I got on that?
Ow.
I was
I just see
Can't
little
hear what
pokes.
she's saying.
She cut her knee going down the Apple River today.
Oh.
Attacking each other, and the
You have to
river.
be careful because
It's
when you
nothing.
start letting blood out in the river, the carp come up and attack your toes.
Now, I'm
They're
not
like sharks.
insensitive. I'm not insensitive to pain and injury. Just little things like that. I'm like, whatever.
Yeah.
Blow that off.
There's
Grit your
very
teeth
little
and move
sewage
on.
left in that river. There's very little sewage, so you probably won't get infected.
Yeah,
It's dead people water.
dead people water. There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the river, you think it's a flowing course, you know?
Yeah, but bodies tend to float around. So
Yep.
yeah.
They only float in little pools. You know?
Hopefully she won't turn into a zombie tonight.
It
I hope
can-
not.
Some parts on the river, like under the bridges, can get down to 80 feet under.
80 feet under the bridge.
Or no, it might have been
Probably 8
75.
feet. Probably
No.
8 feet.
No,
Apple River's not 80 feet deep anywhere, I don't
it
think.
might have been 75. It's under that.
Might have been
first-
75.
It's under that first little bridge. Like you can even chuck yourself underwater. We couldn't touch the bottom.
Holy
Well,
cats.
I would like to point out at your height, if it were 8 feet, you couldn't touch the bottom.
Yeah.
I know, but I went.
I know, but
No, I know, but I went. Me and my friends, we went cliff jumping at a place that had cliffs, and it was about 12 feet for the water. And we jumped in, and we could touch the bottom. And we were like standing on our tubes and jumping off, and we couldn't even touch 8 feet.
this is why you shouldn't be cliff jumping. If you can touch the bottom, it's too shallow to jump off.
No, because you break your neck.
Yeah.
Or other things.
Well, we only touched it so we went under, and we could push ourselves under more. And
But
that's how-
only, Dad. But only we didn't die.
But only
yet.
Dad.
So,
Dad, gosh.
So
Jeez,
cool.
Dad.
okay,
God,
listen,
Dad.
Dave, you're such a Debbie Downer.
You guys take all the
Yeah,
fun
really.
away.
We do. We just defund her story. I
What
love your story.
was,
Though. I'm glad you had to go down the Apple River today. Susie Q, how you doing? Cannon
Who-
Corn.
Who is the Pharaoh that believed in one God?
Akhenaten.
Akhenaten. When was he?
He would have been 3 or 4 generations after Amenhotep II and the Exodus. So he was still 18th dynasty. He was the father of Tutankhamun.
Okay,
And,
so I
King
just want
Tut.
to ask this question.
Yeah.
So he believed
No.
in one God, and I know people say he believed the
No,
Son
he
was
had
the
nothing to
God,
do
but
with
he
Moses.
believed in one God. And when he left, he was wiped out. He was erased. Correct?
Yep.
And his people left with him. His people were gone. How do we not know he wasn't Moses and he took
wasn't.
all those people and left, and that's why those cities were abandoned?
Because we know the city he built and we know all the history around it. He was at odds with the priesthood. And the priesthood, so he said, I'll show you. I'm just going to go monotheistic.
But how do we
And I'm
know
gonna
that
move
they
the capital from
become
Thebes
the Jews?
to Amarna? And so he went 300-400 miles up the river and established a city at Amarna. And he died at Amarna. So not Moses. Thank you for playing. Anybody who thinks Akhenaten is Moses. No, he wasn't Moses. No, not making fun of you, Dave. He just wasn't. Doesn't fit the history. He would have lived too far from the dating system. Let's see. You would have had Amenhotep II. I'm trying to think of who came next. I think it went into, I believe Akhenaten was Amenhotep IV. But
Baba
there was
Hotep.
another name in there too. Amenhotep IV changed his name to Akhenaten.
And you're completely discounting Tennessee, but they call them the Smoky Mountains. Why? Because they're still smoldering from God's touch.
Still smoldering from God's touch. I think
They
that's
tell us it's
no.
God's country, and we cannot forget Baba Hotep.
Baba Hotep, that's right. Baba Hotep was there.
So I'm just saying,
Just saying. Yo,
Moses
oh.
could have had taken place over here.
Yeah. Folks, if you haven't seen Baba Hotep, by the way, you need to see that. And it's a very good movie. I wouldn't call it historically sound, but it's a good movie.
Well, I
So,
think you could poke a
fun
few
movie.
holes in it, but I think it's historically sound.
I'm sure you do. And you also believe Akhenaten might have been Moses. Put those two things together. So, yeah, Akhenaten was not Moses. Too many discrepancies in his story. He died at Amarna. They think he may have been killed.
So say they.
they say it is said that he might have been killed. And his son, King Tut, took over, and they immediately moved the capital back to Luxor, or Thebes. And why did they do that? Because King Tut didn't have the power to stop them from making that happen again. And it was all a big war with the priests.
What happens when you become king at 12? Don't have as much power as you think you do.
You die at 16. So
12-year-olds, they think they know everything.
I know.
10-year-old, and then
well, look who succeeded him.
It's
who
too late.
Succeeded him? Horemheb, who was the general of the armies. So there is a belief that Horemheb may have been foul play there. There's two views on that. And by the way, at Gebel El Silsila, John and Maria's archaeological site, we always moor the boat at the Dahabeah at the Speas of Horemheb, which is a shrine. You can go back inside. There's all the statues. Well, what John and Maria found, it's now published data, is that shrine was actually usurped by Horemheb, and they scraped off the old pharaohs, the original pharaoh who made that shrine, scraped off the erasure, scraped off the relief work, and put his on. But in ultra-red photography, you can still see, almost as clear as day, the original stuff that they scraped off, because they can't get it all.
That is correct.
And it was Hatshepsut, the woman who elevated Senenmut to power. And that was her shrine. And so that's very interesting stuff. So the shrine of Horemheb was actually the shrine of Hatshepsut, the Speas of. So very good stuff.
And his mom wore the strap-on beard?
Yeah, she wore the strap-on beard. She dressed like a man to be the pharaoh. She wanted to be seen. I don't think it was a sexual thing. She wanted to be taken as the king of Egypt. She elevated herself to that point. She said, I am the pharaoh. I'm not the queen pharaoh. I am the pharaoh. And so she wore men's clothing. She wore the beard.
You look at Tutankhamun. Tutankhamun had male breasts, so
might have had.
No, he did. They've done that genealogy thing, and he suffered from that condition where he had rounded hips and breasts and stuff because of the inbreeding and stuff.
He's a little deformed. There's the inbreeding, exactly.
And so because of that, I'm guessing she puts a fake beard on and everybody's buying it.
Yeah,
that's probably what their pharaohs look like.
Because you didn't have newspapers and television back then.
Yeah.
Well, she dressed that way to be. I always compared her reign to the reign of Elizabeth I of England. Now she didn't dress as a man, but she was a woman in a man's position, and it took her a lot of effort and work to make sure that she was accepted as powerful as a king. And she had a pretty peaceful reign. She had a couple of things go on, obviously Spanish Armada, and she had the conflict with Mary Queen of Scots, her cousin. But she had all these different, you can recount it as well as I can, all these different men of court that would rise up thinking that they could be a better king than she was the queen. Yep. And what happened to all of them? They mostly all got beheaded.
Off with their heads.
Yep. And what did you have going on?
To the tower.
This is one of my theories about Senenmut and Hatshepsut, is that she elevates this guy to power. In Egyptian history, all we know about him is he was born to commoners. That's all we know about him. Who was a commoner? Could a slave or an indentured servant be a commoner? Sure. They never said he wasn't Egyptian, but I believe all the Hebrews at the time believed they were Egyptian as well.
I believe they were as well.
And they had Hebrew blood, or Israelite blood, if you will. And they held to some of those traditions, but they were very Egyptianized by that time. Remember, before the slavery was imposed, what happened for about 700 or 800 years in northern Egypt, the northern capital in Mennefer? you had all these people that were coming in from outside the country and settling in the Nile Delta. Now, they had to get permission to do that from the Egyptian king. And so they all came in and settled. And what happened is they settled into this fertile land and the Egyptians called them the Asiatics. They were the ones from the Middle East they referred to as Asiatics. And when all these people would come in, they were mingling into the citizenry of Egypt for 700-800 years.
Exactly.
And then what happened? Those people, this is where you had the Hyksos kings that divided Egypt. The Hyksos took over the northern capital of Memphis, and the Egyptians were in the south at Luxor or Thebes. And what you had was all these people from the Middle East. They still had their Middle Eastern culture. One of the family tribes was the tribe of Jacob. That was a tribe that moved there during this period. Toward the end of this period, they moved the whole family there. And Joseph, their brother, through Pharaoh, he became the Grand Vizier of Egypt. He gave them, and Pharaoh gave the permission, the sign off on his family of about 80 people moving into the Nile Delta, the land of Goshen, very fertile land. Joseph told them in the biblical story, he said, this is some of the best, most fertile land. And he said this to them, which here's Professor Bauer. Hey, Professor Bauer.
Good evening, everyone.
Good
gentlemen.
So what happens when, at the time when, I'm just on a point here, Professor, you can kick in your 2 cents if you want to, too. What you had with all these Asiatics moving into Egypt for several hundred years, they took over the northern throne, and they became what were called by the Egyptians the Hyksos kings, or the shepherding kings, the kings from the Middle East. And they took over for 108 years, and they had their own dynasty of kings in the north. Now, I believe that, and this is circumstantial, this is where I use circumstantial and speculative history, is that Joseph, you know, the whole story, Joseph and the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, his brothers were jealous, and they threw him in a pit, and they sold him into slavery, and then told their father Jacob that he died at the hands of an animal, the claws of an animal.
They were jealous of his solo career.
Yeah, that was it. And so Joseph ends up in a slave in Egypt. He ends up in prison because Mrs. Potiphar cries rape when she tries to get him to go to bed with her. That's the way the story goes. Well, then he's risen out of prison because he interprets dreams for the Pharaoh. Now, the Pharaoh here
totally falls off the charts, though.
What's that?
He totally falls off the charts for years because of that.
Falls off the charts for 20 years, and before he's elevated to power. And so 20 years have gone by now, and he's elevated to, he becomes the Grand Vizier of Egypt. You say, well, how does this happen? Well, there's a key to this, and that is, remember, Joseph is from a tribe of Asiatics or Canaanites that the Egyptians called the Asiatics, and they're now in power in the north of Egypt. In a sense, Joseph and his family are cousins to them. So there is a scene where Joseph's brothers, he's now elevated to Grand Vizier. His brothers show up and don't recognize him. They don't even know he's alive anymore, according to the biblical story. And it's
he's buffed out some too.
He's been 20 years. Yeah, he probably buffed out a bit, shaved his head, wears a wig now.
He's wearing a skirt.
So they have to come to him to get permission to move into Goshen. And Joseph recognizes them, of course, according to the story. Well, when he finally reveals who he is and all of that, and the whole story plays out, he says to his brothers in the book of Genesis, he says, when you go into Pharaoh to get his approval to move into the land, he says, tell him that you are shepherds and that you've been shepherds from the days of your youth, because the Egyptians hate shepherds. And I thought, well, why would he tell his brothers, why don't you warm the waters a little bit with Pharaoh, break the ice a little bit, tell him you're a shepherd, which he hates? Well, it's because he wasn't Egyptian. He was one of the Hyksos rulers. The Egyptians hated the shepherds. They hated the shepherding kings. They hated the people from Canaan. They hated the Hyksos. And so I believe Joseph presented his brothers and was brought to power by a Hyksos king. Because why? Because he was kin folk, so to speak. That's where maybe your Appalachian connection. Hey, kin folk.
Yep.
And
telling you,
now what's
Appalachian.
interesting too is it says so his brothers move there, and then their father dies. They bury him, and his brothers all die, and Joseph dies. And it says, and after a generation later, it
That
says
worked out well for him.
the Pharaoh rose to the throne, and who had no regard for Joseph. And this no regard, and so he slapped the Hebrews and whoever was left of the Hyksos remnant into either slavery or indentured bondage. Now, the biblical account said all it says is that he had no regard for Joseph. Who the hell's Joseph? I don't care. It doesn't mean he didn't know who he was. It means he had no regard for him. Why? Because I believe it was Pharaoh Ahmose the First, Ahmose, that ousted. Well, it's a historical fact. He ousted the remnant, or not the remnant. He ousted the Hyksos out of northern Egypt and took back over the northern throne. And what does the Pharaoh in the Bible say? He says, I don't know who this Joseph is. I have no regard for him. And he says, we're going to put them all into bondage. Why? He says, so they do not rejoin our enemies and take up the sword against us again. So I believe the Pharaoh of Genesis, that was the Pharaoh who did not know Joseph, circumstantial evidence would tell you this is the guy who had no regard for Joseph, because Joseph was elevated by a Hyksos king. Joseph was also one of the shepherding kings, and he did not want the remnant of those people to be left to take up the sword against them and join their enemies against them, he said. So he slaps them into bondage. Now, who's the son of I think it's the grandson of Ahmose the First, is Tutmosis the First. Tutmosis the First would have reigned in 1526. He was on the throne for a year or two. It would have been this Pharaoh that the dating system I referred to, the 480 years, the 1446 for the Exodus. You take 80 more years off of that, go back in time to when Moses would have been born. It would have been during the first year of the reign of Tutmosis the First. Tutmosis had a daughter. His daughter held a title. Her name was Matkare. She held the title of Pharaoh's daughter. That was the legal title underneath the Pharaoh. What does Moses refer to as the woman who found him in the Nile? Pharaoh's daughter found him in the Nile, and she returned him to his mother until she was old enough to claim him. Matkari in 1526 was only about 7 to 10 years old, about Rowan's age. And so she sends him back to his mother, then reclaims him. And this is the man who she eventually, and Matkari, she becomes Hatshepsut. That is her regnal name. And she is the one who elevates Senenmut, gives him 92 different royal titles. She names him Senenmut, which means mother's brother. I, your mother, am elevating you to the status of brother to the gods with me, along with 91 other titles.
I was thinking
Vizier,
found it in mud.
Grand Vizier, Grand Royal Architect. There's also all the evidence that points to Senenmut and Hatshepsut being lovers. And there's a lot of evidence that points to that. As a matter of fact, one of the very telling things, her temple of Diyar el-Bahri in Luxor, it's that low colonnaded temple with the big ramps going up, and it's set against this curve, this crescent moon arc of the Theban mountain cliffs right above her temple. Well, right on the other side of those cliffs is the Valley of the Kings. Now, what happens? Senenmut, it becomes her Grand Royal Architect. He designs her tomb. He designs 2 of his own tombs. And one of his tombs is on the front side of her temple, and it bores into the ground about 90 feet, something like that, and goes way back. On the other side of the Theban mountain, of the crest, is Hatshepsut's tomb. And he bores that hole in the ground all the way down. And if you did a cutaway side by side, I've seen it done in drawings. Those 2 tombs, Valley of the Kings and Hatshepsut's temple, those 2 tombs come and they meet with one wall of stone in between them. This was what he did for his love for his Pharaoh, the queen. Then there's the graffiti of him shagging her that's up in the cave up above her temple that was drawn there by the workers. So there's all kinds of things, all kinds of speculative little bits of circumstantial evidence that seem to point to this dating system being the dating system, to Senenmut being Moses. One of the things, and I'll let you talk in a minute here, Professor Bauer. I want your opinion on some of this. Is that
get a word in.
If Senenmut was indeed Moses, the Bible says he fled from Egypt after killing a taskmaster, and he flees Egypt. But he's a
we're back to Bubba Hotep.
And Bubba Hotep is who he killed.
Killed a man.
Killed a man. And so you've got Senenmut here now, who completely disappears. He's got all these royal titles. He's the Grand Vizier. He disappears without any information given in Egyptian history as to why. Totally disappears off the face of Egyptian history when he's about 40 years old. And he was the lover to the queen. And not long after that, Hatshepsut dies. And I speculate, this is pure speculation on my part. Remember when I compared the reign of Hatshepsut to the reign of Elizabeth I, a woman in a man's job. And she was the queen becoming the king, the queen who would be king. And she was the king. She was the pharaoh. She had factions, I'm sure, in those days. And I'm wondering if one of the guys, this is pure speculation on my part, based on history, that perhaps Senenmut, Moses, murdered a taskmaster who happened to be not just a lowly guy with a white kilt and a whip, but maybe one of the higher ups that was one of the factions that was factionalizing against Hatshepsut. And he offed this guy, and what happens? Everybody's out for his head. Well, he flees Egypt. He disappears. Nobody knows whatever happened to him. There's no record of his death. He had 2 magnificent tombs that he made for himself. Neither of them were occupied. There was his connection to Hatshepsut. She dies. He disappears. Well, then you've got, now here's what's interesting, where I started to piece some of this together. After Hatshepsut's death, what do? They eradicate almost every image of her. Her own temple, Deir el-Bahri, they smashed some of the faces on the statues, and there were some of these figures of her as the pharaoh that were totally artistically chiseled out. You can see pictures of these where they just chiseled her cartouche out, all over Egypt. And so they say that Tutmosis III, her stepson, who had been the general of her armies, now comes to his rightful place as pharaoh when he's right around 30 years old, that he did this. Well, he did some of it that they found historically now, that he did some of it just to establish, I'm the pharaoh now. Now, no longer my stepmother, no longer the co-regent. And but that it was 40 years later that his son, Amenhotep II, when he came to the throne at age 18, co-regent with his dad for a couple of years, dad passes away, he becomes pharaoh in his own right. He eradicates every other image of Hatshepsut. But what else does he do? The Exodus would have taken place when he would have been about 23 years old by the dating system. What does he do when he's that age? He not only eradicates every image of Hatshepsut, he eradicates every image of Senenmut he could find. Eradicates 9 statues of Senenmut holding the royal daughter of Nefertari, of Hatshepsut, who died when she was a teenager. All these statues were buried in a pit in Luxor in antiquity. He eliminated every aspect of Senenmut. There's only one inscription of Senenmut's that seemed, and by the way, even down at Gebel El Silsila, John and Maria's site, 500 miles south of Mennefer, Cairo, there's a shrine there that has Senenmut's statue where his cartouche and his images and his face is smashed off, even down there. That's why the stone I showed yesterday, showing Tutmosis III and Hatshepsut as co-regents, was very rare. So they find all this buried in a pit, and the only place you can find an inscription of Senenmut now, Hatshepsut's temple, in the Holy of Holies, there were these huge stone doors with stone hinges that set into a hinge hole, that these big stone doors would open into the Holy of Holies, and they'd close. You'd have to close them from the outside. What they didn't see was way down on the floor level, in the corner, right by the hinge on both sides, is a little cartouche of Senenmut, saying Senenmut, the one and only friend, or the one true friend of the queen, Hatshepsut. And his image is there. It's about this big, on both, down by the hinges. So when they closed those doors, they couldn't see him. When they opened them, they couldn't see him. And so those remained. But there's some very interesting history about Amenhotep II as well, that, again, circumstantial. He led 5 successful military campaigns between age 18 and 23. At 23, when supposedly his armies were, by the biblical story, destroyed, he went for another 11 years or so without a single military campaign. It took him to rebuild his armies. That's one of the speculations. And there's even speculation, this will be my final point on this. Sorry.
Heard that before.
Yeah.
It's been so nice. It's been so nice to have you here, Professor Bauer. At the end of our show.
Have a good night now. There was one speculative, I've never heard anybody make this speculation before. Remember, a Grand Vizier, basically, in other words, was the Pharaoh in the place of Pharaoh, one step off the throne. When Pharaoh was gone fighting a war, who was the Pharaoh? The Grand Vizier. Now, interestingly enough, there was a man that Moses would have grown up with, Senenmut grew up in the school of the nobles when he was a kid, a teenager, as a prince of Egypt, as a nobleman. He was a man named Rechmir, who we know very well. I visited the tomb of Rechmir. He's got paintings on the walls of his tomb showing Semitic slaves by the color of the skin. They painted them yellow. Egyptians were painted red. And so on the walls of his tomb. But Rechmir would have been a contemporary of Senenmut, roughly the same age, around 80. Well, he became Tutmosis III's Grand Vizier after the disappearance of Senenmut and Hatshepsut's death. He went through the whole reign of Tutmosis III, and he became the Grand Vizier around age 78, 79 for his son, Amenhotep II, the son of Tutmosis III. Now, there's an interesting theory that I put forward based on one little verse in the Old Testament where it says, when Pharaoh, he gets up one more. Well, you got all this contest with Pharaoh and all the 10 plagues and however long that drew out, weeks, months. But then you've got Pharaoh comes to his court in the morning and he goes, where's my slaves? Where are my slaves? And they told him, well, here's what happened. And he says, mount up the armies. We're going to chase them down. They started that same day chasing them down. Well, my speculation is this is Amenhotep II returning from battle. And he goes, where the fuck are my slaves? And Rechmir, the elderly Rechmir, is like, well, here's what happened, your most holy Pharaoh, and whatever. And what does he do? Tells his soldiers, don't take off your armor, mount right back up. We're chasing them down. It's speculative on my point, and there's a little more to it than that. But I have a feeling that there is a possibility that Rechmir, this is all speculative on my part, Rechmir and Senenmut, Moses, had bad blood going way back because Senenmut's elevated to Grand Vizier under Hatshepsut. That should have been Rechmir. Well, Rechmir becomes the Grand Vizier later, and he encounters the older Senenmut coming back to say, let my people go. And he said, fuck off, dude, I think would be in the vernacular. And they had that conflict. And I think, anyway, there, I'm going to leave that at that. That's one of my speculations. So, Professor Bauer, what do you think?
Take a breath. Hey, Bauer, how are you?
Yeah, let me give you a little break there. Let's see. I think, first of all, that if you haven't done it already, you need to do audiobook versions of your books.
Yes.
That alone, I think, will be more interesting and impactful, not because your illustrations aren't amazing, but being able to just, and I've been doing this a lot lately, actually for many years, but even more so lately, where I'll get engaged with the different things I need to do, and I'll put on a lecture. I'll put on a Grant Hancock, Randall Carlson, Rupert Sheldrake, whoever, and I'll just have, they're showing all kinds of slides and some amazing graphics and so forth, but
yes,
I listen to what they're talking about as far as how and what and why they've come up with what they've experienced and done and written and lectured about. And what you're doing, what you've been doing tonight in particular, but this is just basically a theme of who you are. You tell stories.
I do.
And you tell stories, I think, just as well almost as you illustrate. And you just don't do that enough. So that's the first thing. You need to
actually this whole theory of Senenmut and Rechmir and the whole story after Exodus Reality came out. My agent wanted me to write. Can you do a trilogy of books targeted at the young adult market, meaning young adult being your teenager to college age kids?
Right.
She says that tells this story as in a novel form. I said, sure. Haven't done it yet, but
well, I think you should start with the books you've written. You should start with the recording of tonight, with what you just went through, because you were basically, if nothing else, the transcript is something you should work with. So that's the first thing I got to say.
Cool. Thank you.
I agree.
The second thing is, as I was listening to this, and I'm familiar with some of it, but nowhere near to the depth and detail that you just expressed. But as I was listening to it, I started to get references and associations of metaphorical analogies, specifically as it relates to the Sumerians and even the Babylonians, the Akkadians. I mean, their own mythos of their stories of hierarchy and familial interactions and overcoming, different, conquering different civilizations and so forth, have a lot of, it's almost the same type of thing. Somebody's married to somebody and somebody pissed off at them for whatever reason, because they wanted them or they believed they owned or were the right bloodline and succession, and et cetera, et cetera. And then they go about trying to rewrite or change history by defaming and defacing and doing all those things. Okay. So, so some of so it made me think about that. The fact that it's just a lot of metaphorical, analogical other civilizations other than the Egyptians. Okay. Now, so then the next thing I thought of was this. Most of what you just described happened within the last 5,000 years, right?
Yes. 3,000 years ago, 3,500.
Yeah, so about 1500 BC, right?
Yes.
The current mainstream historical timeline for the Egyptian culture goes back maybe to 3000 BC, another 1500 years before this. Is that correct?
Yep. Thereabouts.
But yet you have kings lists written in the Egyptian mythos that go back tens of thousands of years.
Yeah.
Very true.
Okay. And that seems to be, there seems to be a cutoff point at around 3000 BC where anything before that becomes mythological. It becomes something that's like, yeah, no, they were just really hitting the...
It's because they was the aliens.
Right?
Yes.
But the Egyptians themselves wrote of these kings and were methodical in listing them down as reigning 5,000 years, 10,000 years, or much more than what the reign was starting at 3000 BC.
Yes.
Right. So how much of the story that you just told is actually from a much earlier date?
What he said.
How much of the story of Senenmut and Hatshepsut, or a story of a similar story like that?
Well, both. I mean, do we really know archaeologically and scientifically, and being able to say, it's like, no, there is no proof of Moses.
Right.
There is no proof of Noah.
Right.
Noah and Gilgamesh. How do you separate those stories?
Atrahasis.
You can't really.
Which was in the Sumerian Enuma Elish, or in that not the tablets of creation, but the follow-on.
But thousands of years apart.
Thousands of years before the Egyptians.
Yeah.
How do you square that, or not even square? How much of it is analogical and metaphorical, as opposed to actually what we think happened? I mean, you laid out a beautiful, detailed trip through, the various archaeological components, where they are, which way they face, what there seems to be in some of the stela, and some of the obelisk and so forth.
Right.
When you get into like the Edfu texts, I mean, now you're talking, they've got a whole nother history.
It's crazy.
It's almost completely different than what is in the main Egyptian archaeology, which even itself is just pieces of the total.
That's it. Yeah.
Because the first thing I thought I was going to go, I was like, well, let's see, I haven't been on in a while, and he's kind of wondering if I'm...
Yeah, I wondered if you were still alive.
And when you started talking about the archaeological sites, I said, I'm going to jump in and throw some Abydos.
I'm glad you did. And I'm glad you came on so early.
But I thought, well, this would be a good time to insert a little Abydos in the helicopter.
There you go. Yeah. We'll have to talk about that one.
And it's crazy how you come in and you just start talking for like the first 40 minutes you're here. We can't even shut you up. It's crazy.
Oh, me or Professor Bauer?
What? What?
Yeah, what you talking about, Willis? I mean, especially when it's like Philip Blair in the chat room just dropped West and Robert Schock and the Sphinx itself. I mean, everything that I've been presented with as far as the current evidence, observational analysis, and speculation of what it means, is that the history is tens of thousands of years older than what we have been told.
Yes.
And
yeah.
The periods of time that are marked by, Akhenaten. What was the guy's the
Akhenaten?
The one who changed it to a monotheistic.
Yeah.
Akhenaten. Yeah.
Akhenaten be doing that.
Akhenaten be doing that.
You're going to be getting in trouble. You'd be doing that. It seems to me that there's like these markers that have kind of been put in place as far as the timeline is concerned. And there's certain events that are used as those markers, certain individuals, certain empires, collapsing, wars, all those good things. And when I stumbled across Fomenko's work on time and on the timeline that we have, and it's amazing. I didn't know this, but Isaac Newton was of the same thought that there was a minimum of a millennium, 1,000 years, that had been added to the time as it was, the timeline that we currently have. And Fomenko's done 7-volume work. This guy is a major polymath, and he did this amazing research. And apparently squared up with what Newton, that there's been at least 1,000, maybe 1,500 years added to the timeline. So
I've seen some of the stuff on that. Oh, I just got rid of Dave and accidentally. Sorry, Dave.
You got fat finger, Dave.
I hit the wrong button.
So we would be
just make sure you're not next. Might have a little accident, a little trigger finger.
I'm kind of counting on it with the next statement. So if that's true, then we're actually in 1022, not 2000.
I just heard that. I just came across that theory not long ago. And sorry, Dave, you can still hear us. You can call back in. That was an accident.
The evidence is extremely compelling, especially when you look at it just in a neutral,
it is very compelling,
objective viewpoint.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dave.
I did that myself. I was having a connectivity issue.
I thought I did it.
And no, I did it. I went to swipe to a different screen to see what was going on behind here, and I shut it off.
I see it. That was right as I clicked to remove. There were photos sitting in the wings here that I showed tonight. I was removing.
No, that was me. I swiped myself off.
Well, good. It wasn't me. Then I'm not sorry.
So anyway, just to finish off my little observation of that, you need to start doing audiobooks of your books. You need to tell stories.
Here.
It would be outstanding. People would love it.
The closest I've come to doing audiobooks.
I think they're actually more interested in hearing you than looking at you. So, I mean, that's just one man's opinion. I could be wrong.
The closest I've come to doing audiobooks is I've read all my books on this show, 3-4 years ago, reading the books. So chapter by chapter kind of thing. So
anyway, at that, I think that there seems to be just so many coincidences and overlaps of stories that go further back than the Egyptian period that this is a
so agreed.
Okay.
That's like the El Arish stone, where it shows this story that kind of flows along like the Exodus. It even has a hieroglyph I mentioned this earlier in the show tonight, a hieroglyph that stands for the parting of waters. 3 ripples on top of each other and a knife is the hieroglyph for the parting of the waters. And it was kind of this fairy realm thing, and there's a princess and a queen, and they think it's Hatshepsut and all of that. But they think it's a retelling of the Exodus story in a fairy tale.
Well, it's the same thing with the 7 tablets of creation out of the Enuma Elish out of the Sumerians. It goes through a much more detailed account, and with all of the main points that are in Genesis on creation, and adds a whole bunch more detail. And you go, well, where is the Genesis account written by a guy who apparently wrote it after his death? The first 5 books.
Right.
You go, well, how can he reference his own death if he's writing it?
Well, I think somebody else picked the pen up there, know, and
that could be.
Like Moses dies at the top of Mount Nebo.
He'd been done with automatic writing.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, he was a chosen one, apparently, and was divinely guided with
scribes,
angels and spirits and stuff feeding
And by the way, when you finish this after I die, I want you to say, I was strong, I didn't lose my eyesight, I was for 120 years old. I was good.
The deal I signed was so tight. Even after I died, I had 5 more books to write, and they made me write them.
Hey, I got to show you some pictures while we're at it here. I just got 3 pictures. By the way, here is the X-rated graffito from above. Well, first, let me show you Deir el-Bahri. This is, I took this picture as we were going up to a cave. You see the wall in the background there, the stone wall. Well, it wraps around in a crescent shape around behind where I was standing here. And this is Hatshepsut's temple of Deir el-Bahri in Luxor. And behind me here, we were going up into the wall, the cliff wall here, to climb into the workers' cave. And the workers' cave where was the graffiti of Senon Shagan Hatshepsut. And it was painted on there in the day by the workers who would go use this cage to go. They'd go up there to take breaks, to hide. They'd go up there to shag, whatever. So this is her temple. And it was on the other side of this mountain range right here. It's not even a range. It's cliffs, and then you got a plateau on top. You can ride along the paths on your horses up there and stuff, but it goes down into the Valley of the Kings on the other side. So then there's this. This was the graffiti inside that cave. And this is Senenmut and Hatshepsut. And they identified them because it dates back to the building of her temple. The paint, the ink of the pigment used here. She's wearing the pharaonic crown. She's got the beard, the fake beard. She's got a cobra. These are all.
And he's got the strap on.
And she's got a vajayjay right here in the middle. And you've got.
Well, they didn't have anything on the Pompeians. That's for damn sure.
That's for sure. Yeah, this is a worker. You got to figure this is a guy who hauls off dirt for a.
He's not an artist.
So not an artist. And even when you think he's placed.
But I just want to say he's not an artist. But 2,000 years later, we know who he's drawing. So
yeah, we know who he's drawn.
Right.
He's placed the penis way too high. And the vajay.
That's why I called it the strap on. It's even got a little strap going around his waist.
A black triangle there. And of course, his proportions are all off. So he had to add blocks under her hands to show that she's leaning on something.
Oh, that's what that is. Okay.
And there are other pictures of Senenmut where he's wearing this headpiece, like this kind of a leather headpiece. It's like
who's the pharaoh now? Who's the pharaoh now?
Who's the pharaoh now? Yeah, exactly. And I also pulled up this picture. This is at Gebel El Silsila. This is the shrine of Senenmut. And his face
looks
was
like
taken
Scotty
out.
Roberts.
I was going to say it looks a lot like
behind
Scotty.
me. Sorry,
behind you.
Yeah. And up above the shrine is you see the eagle's wings, and there's hieroglyphs all over the wall, but his name is chiseled out, as is his face. But that's
so what you're saying is there's a figure of someone who's been erased, and you want to call it Hatshepsut.
I don't want to call it that. Yeah. Don't be faux skeptical with me.
Yeah, what Dave said.
So there are other ways to tell. So with other,
he had a large strap on.
They took off his name. So, by the way, when John Ward mentions strap on, he's talking about Hatshepsut's beard, not Senenmut's phallus. So,
sure, whatever.
Yeah, she's taller than him.
Well, I find all of this extremely fascinating. It seems to be, although you've certainly done a lot of research. You've got all kinds of dots that you've thrown on the table and connected. But like I said earlier, it seems to me like this is just another in a series of very similar mythos, which the
queen who becomes king, who's in love with her grand vizier, elevates him to power.
These people just had
is this repeated mythos, or is this maybe where the mythos got its core?
Well, that's why I brought up the King's List and the Sumerians. Even the Sumerian King's List goes back at least 250 to 300,000 years, right? Whereas the Egyptian goes back 30 to 50,000, I think, which ties in some very other interesting ideas and data, particularly from
the King's List that we have, the Chronicle of the Egyptian Kings, the first dynasty. You take that back. What about? I think only about 4,000 BC is when you have 4,000. Not even 5,000 BC is the first dynasty, if I'm not mistaken. I'm just going to double check my date on that.
So where are all the rest of these kings? Where are they the ones that are they the ones that actually built the Sphinx? Are they the ones who actually may have been involved in or created the pyramids, which There is no evidence of who or where or why those pyramids exist. They are simply ascribed to a timeline and to a period and to a people.
Well, here you go.
And you go,
well, and let's not forget, it's not just those 3 pyramids. There are hundreds of pyramids across Egypt.
There's 37 that they know of right now.
There's 250 in China.
Yeah.
Okay, and they're all over Indonesia. They're all over.
So you've got the first dynasty was established in
Antarctica.
First dynasty was established in Egypt in 3100 BC. The time of Hatshepsut and Senenmut was about 1500 BCE. So another 1600 years on top of that, going backwards in time.
So what happened to the rest?
And the Nephilim were here when, Scotty?
I don't know. Nephilim would have been long before this. If you're talking,
you wrote the book. I'm just asking you
what you're looking at. Well, they say that what is it that Noah would have existed as, and there's a chronology that they even do in the Bible from, I think, Abraham back to Noah, the generations backwards. So Noah would have been after the time of, they talk about the time of Jared, which was the time of Enoch, who wrote about her as the topic of the pseudepigraphal book. Pseudepigrapha only by nature of the virtue of the fact that he didn't write it; it was written about him.
And he's what, Enki's grandson or son?
He's like the grandson of Noah, of Adam, something like that. And
so that only goes back to maybe 3,000 years BC.
8,000, I think 7,000 to 8,000 is when they date the possibility of the story of Noah existing.
Yeah, I don't believe any of those dates, but yeah.
But Atrahasis in the Sumerian,
there's no way to know for sure. But they do place the flood during some of the ice ages, and the great what they believe there were 2. Talk to Randall Carlson about this. He'll tell you about the 2 different eras where there was great flooding, 8,000 BCE and 6,000 BCE. 2,000.
Say nothing of the Younger Dryas at the end of the last ice age, which was when the major flooding happened.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And so if you had a major universal flood, let's see, what does Philip Blair's asking a bunch of questions. Ancient erotic romance. How cool. Yeah. She's taller than him. Do they correlate? I wasn't sure what that question was for.
I think he meant copulate, and I would say yes.
Copulate. Yes. I believe they did. Now, it's interesting. I asked somebody I respect a whole lot. This is her book, one of her books. John Ward and I interviewed her. Cara Cooney. She wrote The Woman Who Would Be King. And it's all about Hatshepsut's rise to power in ancient Egypt. And we had her on the radio show. And she'd had a couple of glasses of wine, she admitted. And she sounded very friendly and very cheery. And you know how people talk when they're scholars, and then you get them after a couple of glasses of wine, and they're like, oh, yeah, this shit is just amazing. And so Exodus Reality, there it is. There's a good book. Don't read it now, Dave.
Oh, okay.
But her book, The Woman Who Would Be King, she wrote this book and all about Hatshepsut. And when we had her on the radio show, I said, I got to ask you, about 2/3 in, I said, what is your take on Senenmut, the affair between Senenmut and Hatshepsut, the possibility that some speculate Senenmut may have been the biblical Moses? And she was right away. She was just like, I don't even get into that. That's nonsense. I don't even get into that. She says, but the relationship, she says, was actual. There's a lot of speculation about it. She said, but the speculation is based on pretty good evidence that they were stupid.
You're familiar with Carmen Bolter, right?
Not sure off the top of my head.
She's the one that did that, I don't know, it was a multi-part series, The Pyramid Code.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So, she died just over a year ago, I think now, year and a half ago.
She's not the woman who was just a little heavyset with the red hair, dyed
red
hair.
Yes.
I didn't know she died. I was just watching something of hers 2 nights ago in the middle of the night. I turned it on.
The last research that she was doing, and you can find the interview on Dark Journalist Daniel List's channel, YouTube channel. Just do Dark Journalist Carmen Bolter. And she had found up in just over the border of Turkey, if I got the location right, an entire cave system that had Egyptian style artifacts in it, but it was dated back over 20,000 years.
Yeah. Now that'll tell you one of two things: the dating system is wrong, or the carbon-14 dating was wrong. You know.
Well, carbon-14 has its limits,
and of course, you can't carbon-14 stone though, can you? It has to be organic.
Yeah, you have to, but you can use the paints and the material that would be on the stone. There is some reliability in that, apparently. But there's other techniques that are becoming more prevalent because they seem to be more accurate, spectrum analysis and so forth. But
now that's really interesting when you're going back 20,000 years.
Yeah.
Now, was it? Excuse me. Was it Proto-Egyptian or was it Egyptian hieroglyph?
She had not. She'd only released in the interview with Daniel that here are some of the pictures. Here's some of the techniques we've used. Here's some of the initial results, lab work that has come back on these artifacts. And there was a lot of very unusual things that were in the mix, not only Egyptian style representations of, not only the coffins, but the mummies and then statuettes and so forth. But there was also, and this is what she was waiting to put together and then release to the world, there was a bunch of otherworldly entities and remains in this cave.
Interesting.
So I highly recommend that.
I've seen a lot of her stuff on Egypt.
She's pretty amazing.
Committing her name to memory, funny as it is. Now that you mentioned her name, I remember it. But I've seen a lot of her documentaries.
She does some amazing work.
You can go onto YouTube, which is what I do in the middle of the night. If I wake up, I'll turn on YouTube and I'll look for like historical documentaries. And I play her stuff a lot, just one after the other.
Yes.
And so she has some good stuff. I'd like to see what this is about these caves.
I'll dig a link and send it to you.
Yeah, send me a link on that. And in the meantime, you all ought to read Cara Cooney's book. And Cara Cooney, really liked her. Had a little scholarly crush on her. And John Ward knew it, and he would tease me. This is her, by the way. This is Cara Cooney. So, and she's done a lot of documentaries on television on the History Channel.
She looks kind of like Melissa Tittle.
What's that?
She looks very similar to Melissa Tittle from Gaia.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But she is the scholar. We had a little falling out of words once because I didn't like her politics and she didn't like mine on social media. But there's certainly no dislike of her. We just disagreed with politics. And so
I wish I had a dime for every time that happened to you.
So somebody disliked me for my politics. I wish I had a dime for everybody. Yeah. I don't like you anymore because of your political stance. Well, yeah, fuck off. I don't care.
Well, actually, some of the work that you have been talking about, or some of the scenarios you have gone through with these Egyptian folks, in a lot of ways, has a lot of similarities to what we're seeing in our own politics and our own royalty right now. I mean, there's just...
I don't think it's any different. The only different thing is modern technology. People in power are people in power.
Yes.
And
when you get people in power that are trying to run what they have either not been able to achieve on their own, or they have achieved on their own and have decided that ain't nobody going to get my shit. Okay. It's going to get ugly if you come after my stuff.
Yep.
And, oh, by the way, you came after my stuff, so now it's time to get ugly. And we're seeing, the human nature, the human condition at play in spades right now, and they've crammed it all into. They've hit every domain of daily life has been politicized.
Yes.
Cancel culture is the chiseling off of the cartouches and faces of our leaders.
Exactly my
Yes,
point.
yes, it is.
Thank you.
That's a good way to put that, Uncle Dave. Yeah, this book
and it's weird for me as a historian to look back and think, why would you erase your history like that? And then I'm sitting in a time when we're doing that every day.
Yeah,
doing just that. That's a great comparison.
I mean, they've not only taken down statues and defaced things and done all this other stuff, but they've weaponized language and words and completely turned them upside down, inside out, and all around. And you look at it and you go,
and abuse personal history as well.
Exactly.
To fit their times.
Yep.
You know, when you look at the rough draft that Jefferson did, and he wanted to free the slaves and do all this stuff because he believed, hey, we're all God's creatures and we're all created with these inalienable rights. That doesn't mean what color skin you are. It means all human beings. Yeah. And the southern states were like, yeah, we're not having that. If you put that in, we won't sign it.
But see, Dave, that requires that you have a dialogue and a conversation where there's at least, as a starting point, there's a respect between those that are having the discussion and presenting their side of stuff.
Well, right.
There's no respect. So what happens now is that there's an immediate deflection or any number of different techniques, laundry list excuses, irrelevant connections and analogies. You know, most of the stuff that people talk when they are trying to defend their position they're very inept at trying to make their point, state their case, stay on topic, provide, express respect, and being able to have a conversation. So there is no conversation because of all of those filters and the frameworks that people are bringing to the discourse. So
well,
you can't even have a discussion.
Also, what I believe happened with when
more
President
Nazi
Biden came
than the
into
Nazis.
office. Biden came into office, and what was the first thing he did? He spent the first month trying to erase everything Trump had done.
Yeah,
that's erasure right there. So you were saying, Dave,
Antifa is more fascist than the Nazis were.
Yep.
You know, if you want to speak of an opinion that they don't agree with, they shout you down. If you write a pamphlet they don't agree with, they want to burn it. How is that not what the fascists were doing?
It's exactly what they were doing.
And you don't beat them by becoming them.
Yep.
No, in fact, one of the interesting techniques that I've seen people, some really intelligent, well-engaged individuals use is to embrace
well-endowed individuals.
No, we're all here.
Mentally well-endowed, mentally.
But is to embrace the position of the one that has this inability, these inept analogies of whatever it is they're trying to push through, and just say, okay, fine. You take this climate change thing, for example, and say, okay, fine. Let's go green. How do we get there? Well, the first thing, you can't shut the current system down until you have a replacement for that system, right?
That's right.
So let's start there. You can't just wipe it out. Otherwise, if you realize how deep petroleum, which by the way is abiotic, it is not fossil.
Yeah,
it is a naturally occurring result of the geologic process,
and replenishes itself
all the time.
Has been proven geologically to replenish itself.
So you got to get over that piece, and then the second piece they attach to it, which is the filthiness, the dirtiness of it, and what it does. But you can't go there because that's an ideological roadblock that they've put in their path to think about what this might be. So the easiest way is to back up and say, all right, great. How do we get there? Let's sit down and figure out, knowing that everything from our even in food, but our entire existence is not just fuel and vehicles and ships and planes. It's not. Petroleum is in
exactly,
every.
but part of it's in the message. And I tell my green friends this all the time. You have to change your message. Shouting makes people tune it out. If you whisper, they will listen. What's the best way to get somebody to take a bitter medicine? Put it with something sweet.
Yeah.
Well, and that's why what I'm saying is I think this technique is plausible on just about any subject that you find this ideological restraint in a discussion. And that is, okay, great. I agree with you. I think everything should be green and we should get there as soon as we can. Now, how do we do that?
Right.
How do we make that happen? And if part of your answer is shutting down what we currently have, that's not going to work for anybody. It's not going to work for you, for me, or anybody.
I was trying to explain this to a green friend of mine who was in favor of closing down all these factories because they burn a lot of energy, right? And yet, then that puts us relying on somebody else to build a factory, to build that product, to ship it to us, which creates more energy use. So I said to him, why don't you talk to the factory owners and get them to go green? How do you do that? You don't tell them that they're the cause of the problem. That tunes them out. What you do is you say, how much is your energy bill every month? And that's a bottom line figure they will know.
Yep.
Okay. And then you say, how many acres of rooftop do you have in your factories across the country? And how many acres of parking lot do you have where you could put vertical spinning wind towers and such? And when you start laying that out and say, you know, you could cut your energy bill by half, or maybe 3/4, or maybe all, depending on your usage and how you do that, and you'd pay zero for electricity. That's a number they will sit up and listen to, because spread across their factories across the country for a 12-month period, you're talking millions of dollars.
Well, that's just to get it in and up and running.
I understand that, but it's how you sell it in the first place. If you go to these people and say, you're the cause of all this, you're evil, they're not going to buy into your story. But if you show them a way that they can profit by it, they will embrace it. But that doesn't
always work. That's the problem with that. It doesn't always work because they don't want to hear that. So they will find a way to
because you remember, profit
around circles.
Profit is something that the evil elite do, not the common man, right?
It makes sense to people who make sense.
The other point is, and that's why I say go to the process. This whole idea of going to whether it's photovoltaic or it's wind or whatever, all of the systems needed to create those things require the petroleum that we currently use. Number one,
it's true.
Number two.
Absolutely true.
The lifespan of the current technology is not good. It's 5 years, maybe more. And that
but all the more reason that we're building those products here, not buying them from China or someplace else.
That's a benefit that you can throw at them and say, wouldn't that make more sense? And it wouldn't be hard to, I think, sell that point. But my point is this: the entire technology stack for anything that's considered green or renewable is in such an infant, terrible ROI perspective.
Yes.
You can't, there's none of these technologies are ready for prime time, i.e. they are not, they're not sufficiently mature to replace what we have. So that is the bottom line problem in the entire thinking and process. You can get into the weeds, do the...
okay, I'm going to leap off the deep end here.
Okay. Not too long because we're ready to end.
But,
so
but if you believe in things like Project Solar Warden and stuff like that, if you believe that our government is sitting on technology that is hundreds of years more advanced than we think of and has the ability to have craft that use anti-gravity and whatever to propel themselves around the planet and elsewhere, then they have an energy source that is far more efficient than anything we're seeing. And they could unleash that either locally or globally and harness that, and we could change everything in a very short amount of time.
But Dave, Mr. Potter, here's the problem. You're now, in order for that to be true, you've now slid off into the conspiracy realm of space aliens. Okay.
Yep.
Now,
I said I was going to jump into the deep end. I understand that.
We know that.
And you did it within a minute.
We all know that those who go down this path have, their elevator doesn't go to the top floor. So we think that maybe we can, leave that aside and let's go back to making everything green as soon as possible.
Is it possible? We'll discuss that on another night, folks. We'll make that the topic.
Dave, I was trying to...
No, I'm totally fine. I'm totally fine. I
was trying to play the other side there.
I completely agree. I understand where you're coming from and all that, and I get it. But I'm just saying that...
You're right, though.
They're sitting on a technology they could release if they wanted to.
If they're actually sitting on that is something they could.
There are modular nuclear energy devices that have received patent approval in Germany.
Mitsubishi has a fusion generator thing that's about the size of a shipping container. You could have those all over the place, and we could be off of all this other electricity. Yeah, and they last for like 40 years.
Exactly.
We'll have to bring that up as a topic for the night. Maybe next week sometime.
It won't be tomorrow because you're going to get rainy tomorrow, and it won't be Friday because this Friday
I don't want to do it Friday.
Yeah.
So
and Saturday, we don't do a show on Saturday, and I'm going to be on the road with the motorhome at the Renaissance Festival.
There you go.
But Sunday morning, what a great topic!
Oh, Dave, have a turkey leg for me. I used to do the Renaissance every year at my daughter's.
I worked out there for 25 years. I'm not looking forward to this. I'm going out there because I have been asked to attend a wedding and do a sword fight.
Oh, very nice. We'll have fun with that.
Well, stab Uncle a turkey Dave, leg for me.
Thanks for being here tonight. I love you, brother. Talk to you soon. And Professor Bauer, same to you. I go pick up my wife from the airport from Alaska tomorrow night, along with my almost 13-year-old son. So I won't be here tomorrow night.
It's about time you got some rest from Rainey being gone.
Yes. I think that is a very good way to put that. I'm going to have a whole list of things for her to do.
All right. I mean, got it. All right, brother.
All right, Professor. Good to see you. I love you, brother. Talk to you soon.
Too.
All right, folks. And that's it. That's all we're doing tonight. We're going to get out of here because it's that time. It is now 11:12 and 53 seconds Central Standard Time. So let's get out of here. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of this show, being part of this family. I will see you all Friday. There's no show tomorrow other than a replay over on the radio station. Thanks for being here. Good night. Live long and prosper.